Steel has been an important industry in the Black Country, dating back to the 16th century, due to the natural resources found underground for the production of iron and steel. This year, our company celebrates its centenary milestone. The family business was started in 1924 by Piet van Leeuwen in Zwijndrecht, the Netherlands. But did you know that steel had been in production here at the site of the deck house for more than 60 years when Van Leeuwen was created? Did you also know it was a young Queen Victoria who gave the region its famous nickname of the Black Country? No? Then we invite you to come on a journey into the past as we take a step back in time to find out more about the production of steel in the Black Country and the Round Oak Steelworks.
The main reasons the Black Country became the heart of the Industrial Revolution was what was under the ground. So you've got coal, but also ironstone, limestone, clay and sand, and very specific things that you need for making iron, first of all. Blast furnaces in the Black Country were put in the 1750s, and the first steelworks in the Black Country appeared in the 1850s. But during that period, the Black Country had become one of the most successful and important industrial areas in the whole country, and perhaps even the world. But the central family here is the Earls of Dudley. So there've been a line of barons and lords of Dudley stretching back hundreds of years. They owned huge areas of land in this part of Staffordshire and Worcestershire. When the Industrial Revolution happened and they were able to exploit the coal and the iron and things, they became one of the richest families in the whole country. So they owned several thousand acres around here. They owned about 200 coal mines, something like that, brickworks and all sorts of things. So they were able to capitalise on all the raw materials that the Black Country could produce. They had coal mines, iron mines, little iron works here, little iron works there. In 1850s, the Earl of Dudley, the first Earl of Dudley, decided that what he wanted was an integrated site where he could bring everything together. That'd be forges and furnaces and rolling mills and all sorts of things. So he decided on a site next to the Dudley Canal, and next to the Oxford, Worcester and Wolverhampton Railway, which ran through the Black Country. So it would be ideal for importing anything you need, but also particularly exporting all the stuff that he made. This section of canal here at the museum is known as Lord Ward's Arm. And Ward was the family name for the Lords of Dudley. The family were one of the biggest investors in the Dudley Canal when it was built. It was designed to go through his land and to connect with the Birmingham Canal navigation, so the big main canal which goes through from Birmingham to Wolverhampton. This section of canal here goes all the way to the lime kilns that are on our site here that was used to produce the lime that could then be used for steelmaking. That was in the 1770s, that was built. So a long time before Round Oak was even conceived of, but it served all of the coal mines and ironworks in the area, and it made a great position for the Earl in the 1850s to build his steelworks, or his ironworks. As I said, the Round Oak was originally built as an ironworks just for making iron. By the later part of the 19th century, steel had come along. Industrial processes had been developed to produce it on a mass scale, and the Earls thought, oh, we fancy a bit of this. So in the early 1890s, they said, we're going to convert it to steel. We're going to put in the equipment to make steel here. So they produced the first steel in 1894. By this time, it was the second Earl of Dudley, who wasn't really as good a businessman as the first Earl was. But his son, who later became the third Earl, took over the running of the business after the First World War. Up until then, it had been a very successful business. But like lots of places in lots of metalworks and industrial sites in the country, they had a real slump in the early 1920s. After the First World War and after the boom from the war had finished. So they needed someone with a bit of a business brain to come in, and the third Earl, or otherwise known as Viscount Ednam at the time, he was the one to do that. So he kind of reconfigured the business structure of it. He employed specialist accountants to come in and to work out what was needed, and they sort of reconstituted a new board and things with himself as chair, of course, and revitalised it, invested in new kit and a new plant for the works. And really revitalised it, and Round Oak from then on became one of the biggest steelmakers in the region, and certainly one of the biggest employers in the whole of the Black Country. So Round Oak grew from a large ironworks into a huge steelworks. We think that in the 1860s, it was producing something like 550 tonnes of finished iron per week. but by 1951 that had grown to 250,000 tonnes per year. So it's a really huge operation. When Round Oak opened, it was employing about 600 men, so the very large-scale industry for the Black Country at that time. At its height, though, it employed about 3,000 men, and even by the time it closed in the early 1980s, it was employing about 1,200 people.
My name is Terry Lawrence. The final job I had at Round Oak Steelworks was the superintendent of the engineering workshop, and I worked there for about 13, 14 years. I was born in 1943 in Old Hill, in the middle of the Black Country. I lived in a 2-up, 2-down terraced house, as did most of the people. There were 7 people lived in the house. There was myself and my 2 brothers, my mum and my dad, and my nan and granddad. We didn't have a bathroom, we didn't have a kitchen, and our toilet was at the top of the yard. We had no hot running water, and most certainly we didn't have central heating. But that was not unusual, because everyone lived in the same conditions. So it was not something that you were ashamed of, because that was the norm. I was fortunate enough I passed for grammar school, which was quite unusual at that time for someone from my background. But I passed for grammar school, and then also unusually, when I'd finished the grammar school, I didn't go into banking or insurance like a lot of my friends, or even after university. I took on an engineering apprenticeship. That apprenticeship was at Stewart's and Lloyd's in Halesowen. They were tube producers. I think the main reason behind that was the fact that my father was heavily involved in engineering. So were 4 of my uncles. At that time, back in the 50s, there were hundreds and hundreds of steel companies of one sort or another. And it was a normal thing to do. I'd grown up with it. And I was always very good with my hands at manufacturing and mending things. So it was a normal thing for me to do. My dad, as I said, worked in the steelworks. And he had a blacksmith's hearth. And it was in the outhouse at the back of the house. So on a night, he used to come home, he would have his tea, but then he would go into the outhouse and he would make chain. Now, in order to make chain, the fire needs to be bellowed up. And early days, he only had what we'd call a mechanical bellows, one that you pump by hand. And myself and my elder brother used to take turns at operating the bellows. So that was my early introduction to actually working in steel. As I said, I served my apprenticeship at Stewart's and Lloyd's in Halesowen. Excellent apprenticeship, they had a very good training scheme. I left there and worked at 2 other steelworks, but then I heard of a job at Round Oak Steelworks. Now, I knew about Round Oak Steelworks because when I was doing my college work at Dudley College, which I mentioned earlier, a lot of the lads from Round Oak Steelworks were doing the same course. So I actually knew some of the lads, and I knew a little bit about Round Oak. The lads would always spoke highly. I'd been told by my works manager, Stewart's and Lloyd's, if I wanted to get on in life, I need to get more experience, which is why I'd left in the first place. So I applied for a job at Round Oak Steelworks, and I was fortunate enough to get it. I started off in the work study department. I don't know whether such thing exists today, but basically it was a management tool. That was my first part in Round Oak. I subsequently ended up a few years later down the line as superintendent of the local machine shop, the Centenary Engineering Workshop. That was a department which we employed about 70 people actually within that department. As you probably know, Round Oak itself at that time employed well in excess of 3,000 people. It was a big company. The department operated 24/7. So we had people working on a shift basis, so all the time the place was manned.
I think it was probably a huge blow to the community. Not only did they make around 1,200 people redundant, but it has a massive knock-on effect. There are a lot of businesses kind of auxiliary to a steelworks that supply it or are supplied by it. So it made a huge dent. And whereas in the 60s and 70s, the Black Country and Briley Hill in particular had been one of the most successful working class areas in the country and one of the best paid actually, all of a sudden it went from having very little unemployment at all to huge numbers of unemployed people. So maybe up to a third of the town was unemployed in Briley Hill in the early 1980s. The Black Country suffered some of the worst job losses in the country in that short space of time. So it must have had a huge impact on the area, had a massive impact on the landscape, of course, where there was this huge steelworks which dominated everything, and that was all demolished and redeveloped into commercial property, office property. Merry Hill Centre is just next door, of course, and that became the biggest new employer in the area as a retail centre, but very different from what had been there before.
I actually left the company in 1981. It was just before the closure the following year. The last couple of years had not been nice. It had not been the round oak that I'd loved. People were having to be made redundant. I'd have to make people redundant who'd worked for me. I mean, I had grown men crying because they were being made redundant because they'd worked there all their lives, you know. It was not a nice experience at that time. And I got headhunted basically by another company. And I saw my mate, Frank Oliver, who was the employment officer at that time, because my job actually wasn't on the redundancy list. But I went to see Frank and told him what had gone on. And it was arranged that, in fact, someone else had my job and I had their redundancy.
A lot of people think that Britain and the Black Country are a post-industrial place now, but actually that's not true. There's still a huge amount of industry in the Black Country. And having your head office in Briley Hill on this sort of iconic site of where there was such a big steelworks and such a major employer, it's a really, really important part of that. There's still lots of steelworks, steel-related works around, and we make a huge amount of stuff for really forward-looking industries now. So it's lovely that the company can draw on the history of everything from the Earls of Dudley to the ordinary people of Briley Hill that work there and keep that tradition alive.
It was just, everybody was so friendly. It was a very, very good company to work for. We had football teams, we had cricket teams, we had tennis, we had bowling greens, we had snooker, anything. All on the social side, brilliant. I mean, the gardening club, I was a member of the gardening club, and we had a weekend in Paris, you know, we were just all mates. So when you went to work, you were actually going with all your mates. It was very good.
The men, women, children, country and houses are all black, but I cannot by any description give an idea of its strange and extraordinary appearance. The country is very desolate everywhere. There are coals about and the grass is quite blasted and black. I just now see an extraordinary building flaming with fire. The country continues, black, engines flaming, coals in abundance, everywhere smoking and burning coal heaps, intermingled with wretched huts and carts and little ragged children.